The explosion wasn't from Afghanistan this time. It was the site of my family farm flattened into a parking lot. Fresh concrete steamed where my kitchen once stood, and a giant metal sign blinked under construction lights. Willowbrook Country Club. Grand opening soon. My great-grandfather's orchard. Paved. My farmhouse. Erased. 18 months deployed, and Bryce Ashworth rewrote a century of history while I was 8,000 miles away. I barely had time to breathe before 3 sheriff cruisers boxed in my truck. "Mr. Thornfield, you're trespassing," the deputy said. "On my own land." And as Bryce stepped out of his white BMW, smiling like he'd just buried my bloodline, I realized something chilling. He hadn't even started yet. Bryce Ashworth wasn't just an HOA president. He was the kind of man who treated power like a personal hobby. You could spot him anywhere in Willowbrook. Polo shirt in a January snowstorm, clipboard tucked under one arm, smug grin tucked under the other. The guy carried a 47-page rule book, the way preachers carry a Bible, except Bryce used his to punish instead of save. I first saw him tormenting a neighbor because her Christmas lights were unapproved color temperature. He didn't just fine her. He lectured her on the physics of LED bulbs like he was God's gift to suburban electrical engineering. That was Bryce, correcting, controlling, and quietly collecting whatever advantage he could squeeze out of ordinary people. It didn't take long to figure out why he targeted me. My farm sat right against Willowbrook's edge, 3,500 acres of pristine, profitable land that developers drool over. And a deployed soldier? To Bryce, that wasn't service, that was opportunity. Military families made easy prey. We couldn't attend hearings, couldn't fight back, couldn't stop a predator who'd learned exactly which legal gray areas to weaponize. And Bryce had a network to match his ego. His brother-in-law was a sheriff's deputy. His poker buddy was the county attorney. His ex-wife owned the golf design firm that magically won the Willowbrook contract. To him, destroying my family farm wasn't corruption. It was a business model. And I had no idea just how far he'd already gone. I didn't grow up dreaming about courtrooms, injunctions, or HOA wars. I grew up with the smell of diesel mixing with morning coffee in a kitchen my great-grandfather built with his own hands. Thornfield Farm wasn't just land, it was lineage. Silas Thornfield carved it out in 1897, surviving droughts, the Depression, and the Dust Bowl that wiped out half the county. My grandfather grafted apple trees during years when buying food was a luxury. Every fence post, every creek bend, every oak root felt like part of my bloodstream. Dad kept the place alive until the day a John Deere rolled on him when I was 19. Mom remarried and bolted to Florida, leaving me with a choice. Sell 4 generations of sweat, or keep it going while serving my country. I chose both. I enlisted, but I protected the farm the only way I could. Maintenance plans, cattle feed schedules, and handing the keys to Cletus Bramwell, our 73-year-old neighbor who'd been farming since Eisenhower. "Keep an eye on things," I told him. "Son, I've been doing that since before you were born," he said. Before deploying, I walked the property one last time, committing everything to memory. The rough bark of the century-old oaks, the smell of fresh hay, the crunch of gravel under my boots. I didn't know I'd need those memories as evidence. What I did know was Willowbrook. The subdivision popped up on our southern fence line 5 years earlier. Rows of identical houses, HOA rules thicker than a Bible, and residents who liked country living as long as it didn't involve actual country things. The HOA sent the occasional letter about aesthetic alignment or jurisdictional considerations, but my farm wasn't part of their world. Or so I thought. The first crack appeared 6 months into my deployment when Cletus emailed saying a man in a white BMW was taking pictures along my west boundary. I shrugged it off. Developers sniff around farmland all the time. I didn't realize the boundary line Bryce was photographing wasn't the one on any legal map. He was already rewriting it. And the moment I boarded the flight back to Missouri, that crack was about to split wide open. 3 weeks after getting home, I walked into Bryce's strip mall office, still smelling like military sand and jet fuel. He didn't even glance up, just tapped at his laptop like I was a random appointment, not the man whose entire heritage he'd bulldozed. "Mr. Thornfield," he said finally, still typing, "your property accrued $47,000 in road assessments. Willowbrook followed all legal procedures." "My land isn't in your subdivision," I shot back. That's when he gave me the smirk. The kind of smirk you see right before someone steals your wallet and explains why it was your fault. According to the 1987 master plan, he said, the boundaries differ from what you remember. Certified notices were mailed. You failed to respond. I was deployed, I said. He shrugged. Personal circumstances don't cancel civic obligation. Maybe next time you won't abandon your responsibilities. That word, abandon, hit harder than incoming fire. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't dealing with a petty HOA president. I was dealing with a predator who'd made my deployment part of his business plan. The next morning, 3 sheriff cruisers boxed in what used to be my driveway. A young deputy stepped out holding a folded notice like it was radioactive. "Mr. Thornfield, you're trespassing." I actually laughed. This is my property." "Not according to county records," he said. "If you stay, I have to arrest you." Then Bryce's white BMW rolled in, spotless as ever. He stepped out like he was arriving at a brunch reservation. "Ezra," he said, voice dripping superiority, "we can't have unstable individuals disrupting a multi-million-dollar development." "Unstable?" I repeated. "Well, veterans often struggle mentally after deployment," he said, loud enough for every deputy to hear. Behind him stood Deputy Rick Ashworth, his brother-in-law, looking everywhere but at me. I didn't argue. I turned, walked off the property, and drove straight to the county courthouse. If Bryce wanted a war fought on paper, he'd picked the wrong soldier. The courthouse files smelled like dust, mildew, and forgotten truths. I spent days combing records until I found the first crack. Thornfield Farm was protected agricultural land. Willowbrook was a residential HOA. A golf course wasn't an improvement. It was commercial development, which required unanimous homeowner consent. Bryce had exactly 0 signatures. That same week, Bryce launched his dirty war. First hit, my irrigation system. 3 clean knife slices in the main lines, flooding out thousands of gallons during the worst drought in a decade. My orchard leaves curled and browned within days. Second hit, nuisance lawsuit. According to Bryce, my old John Deere tractor violated Willowbrook's noise regulations. The irony? His Saturday leaf blower sounded like a helicopter landing in a cereal bowl. Third hit, environmental inspections. Hazmat-suited inspectors treating my cattle like biohazards because of anonymous complaints. Every test cost money. Every visit drained time. Then came the sabotage. One night, my trail camera caught Bryce's nephew Tyler loosening hydraulic lines on my tractor and pouring what looked like sugar into the tank. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. I started building a case, the kind that didn't just expose a thief, it erased his entire empire. With Judith's help, I filed an emergency injunction. Bryce responded by feeding the local news a story painting me as a veteran trying to dodge legitimate financial obligations. The reporter practically read his script on air. So I told my story somewhere Bryce couldn't control. Facebook. I launched Save Thornfield Farm expecting a few dozen supporters. Within hours, hundreds joined. By morning, thousands. Stories poured in, families across the county describing eerily similar HOA land seizures. Bryce wasn't special. He was part of a pattern. Then Dorothy, the county clerk who knew every dusty file in that courthouse, leaned over the counter and whispered, "Willowbrook hasn't filed its annual corporate report in 3 years. Legally, they're suspended. Everything they've done might be invalid." A suspended HOA had 0 authority. No assessments, no foreclosures, no land transfers. Bryce hadn't just lied. He'd built his entire golf course on a foundation of fraud, and the cracks were spreading. The night before our first hearing, Cletus called at 3:12 a.m. "Ezra, you'd better get here. He brought machines." By the time I reached the property, floodlights blasted across my destroyed vegetable garden. 3 excavators were ripping trenches like they were racing a sunrise deadline. A foreman trudged over. "We got work orders and cash bonuses. Told to finish before dawn." I didn't need to ask who ordered it. Within minutes, Cletus had every farmer in the valley on alert. Tractor lights flicked on across county roads. By 4 a.m., a John Deere convoy formed a blockade that would make a general proud. Margaret, retired teacher, now full-time whistleblower, live-streamed the entire scene to thousands of viewers. Then one excavator hit something that made the operator kill the engine immediately. Water began bubbling up from the torn earth. Clear, cold, constant. The ground opened into a limestone cavity, a natural spring feeding our regional aquifer. The foreman swore. "This is wetlands, nobody told us." Wetlands meant federal protection. By sunrise, EPA vehicles and state troopers lined my fence. Samples were taken, photos snapped. Federal officers whispered words like felony and contamination risk. Bryce hadn't just broken local laws, he had just triggered federal environmental violations that could sink an entire development. And for the first time, the man who stole my family's legacy was cornered. The courthouse plaza looked like a rural uprising. Tractors lined the street. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with Willowbrook homeowners, and TV crews fought for angles. Inside, Judge Patricia Whitman entered with the kind of authority that could quiet a thunderstorm. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, "this hearing determines lawful ownership and potential fraud. Nothing more, nothing less." Bryce walked in late, flanked by lawyers who looked like they regretted every career choice leading to this moment. His confidence flickered when he saw the room, overflowing with people he once controlled, now glaring at him like he was a rabid coyote. His attorney launched into polished nonsense about delinquent assessments and homeowner obligations, painting me as a reckless veteran who ignored civic duties. Bryce nodded solemnly, like he was reluctantly managing a troubled child. Then Judith stood, calm, precise. "Deadly, Your Honor. This entire action rests on the false assumption that Willowbrook had authority at all." Gasps rippled through the room. For the first time, Bryce shifted uncomfortably. The tables were turning. Judith began stacking documents on the evidence table like loading artillery shells. "Exhibit A," she said, "Willowbrook's suspended corporate status. For 3 years, they failed to file legally required documents. A suspended HOA cannot levy assessments, sign contracts, or seize property." Murmurs erupted. Even Bryce's own neighbors looked stunned. "Exhibit B, Willowbrook's 1985 Articles of Incorporation, Clause 47B. Any development impacting regional water rights requires approval from 75% of all 847 property owners across the watershed. Mr. Ashworth received approval from 0. She continued, voice steady as a sniper's heartbeat. "Exhibit C, forensic accounting tracing $347,000 of misappropriated HOA funds into Mr. Ashworth's development company." Calvin stepped forward, explaining the financial scheme with banker clarity. Margaret added 2 years of documented irregularities, missing bids, altered minutes, fabricated assessments. Then the room shifted again when FBI agent Sarah Lucy took the stand. "Our investigation shows a pattern of property seizure targeting military families during deployment," she testified. 5 counties, over a dozen victims. Mr. Ashworth's organization used forged notices and falsified boundary maps to acquire land for profit. The courtroom buzzed like a hornet nest kicked open. Finally, it was my turn. I approached the stand in my dress uniform and placed one document on the table. "Your Honor, here is Mr. Ashworth's environmental report, dated February 15th. Judge Whitman looked up. "And?" "My irrigation system was sabotaged March 2nd. There was no water to test." Silence. Then an audible collective gasp. Perjury. Fabrication. Caught red-handed. Judge Whitman's voice carried the weight of a gavel before it even struck. "Mr. Ashworth, this court finds the property transfer fraudulent, invalid, and void. Thornfield Farm is hereby restored to its rightful owner." Applause erupted. Raw, relieved, furious applause. Bryce's lawyers tried to quiet him, but the man unraveled like cheap thread. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted. "These people are anti-growth, anti-progress. He's a PTSD case. He's unstable. This whole county is out to get me." "Mr. Ashworth," the judge warned, "you are seconds from being removed." But Bryce wasn't listening. His face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "I built this community. I made this place. You think a bunch of farmers and washed-up veterans can stop progress? I'll appeal this all the way to the Supreme Court." 2 federal marshals stepped forward. His lead attorney stepped back. Far back. "Mr. Ashworth," one marshal said calmly, "we need to discuss your involvement in the 4 a.m. construction incident and potential federal environmental violations." That shut him up. Judge Whitman delivered the final blow. All evidence concerning financial crimes, environmental destruction, and fraudulent land acquisition will be forwarded to state and federal authorities. Court is adjourned. Her gavel hit like thunder, and just like that, the man who tried to erase my family's legacy watched his own empire crumble in front of the entire community he once dominated. He'd stolen my land while I was fighting overseas. Now he was the one who had to fight, for every inch of freedom he had left. The morning after the ruling, I stepped onto the farm expecting another ambush, another notice, another deputy, another trick. Instead, the land was quiet. Honest quiet. Dew clung to the broken orchard like it refused to give up. Half the apple trees were scarred from the bulldozers, but new buds still pushed through. Resilience ran deep around here. Cletus joined me, leaning on an old fence post. "These trees'll heal," he said. "Same as you." Word spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors drove by honking, dropping off food and thank you notes. Veterans showed up with tool belts. Farmers offered equipment. Even the high school FFA kids came out to help clean debris, treating the orchard like a historic battlefield worth restoring. Willowbrook changed overnight. People who once whispered about me now offered apologies. Some cried. Some admitted they were scared to stand up to Bryce. All of them thanked me, not for winning the farm back, but for showing them their voices mattered. The HOA board resigned in one emergency meeting. No drama, no excuses. Margaret Henley became president with a unanimous vote. Calvin took over finances and immediately uncovered more missing funds than anyone wanted to admit. But instead of despair, the community rolled up their sleeves. Within a week, where Bryce planned to build a luxury clubhouse, families were planting vegetables in raised beds. Children chased each other through rows of bean sprouts. The smell of fresh soil replaced the stench of developer greed. It felt like the land and the people were finally breathing again. A week later, Bryce tried to make a run for it. He didn't make it past TSA. Federal marshals tackled him at Lambert Airport as he waved a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands and clutched 2 suitcases stuffed with cash. The charges piled up: fraud, forgery, embezzlement, racketeering, environmental destruction, falsified boundary maps, and conspiracy to target military families. News stations replayed the footage like a highlight reel of karma. 14 accomplices across multiple counties faced charges too. HOA board members, county employees, accountants who didn't ask enough questions. Some turned on Bryce immediately. Others claimed ignorance. All of them had to answer for the damage they caused. But the fallout didn't stop there. Our case sparked statewide outrage. Missouri lawmakers passed the Thornfield Act, granting automatic protections to deployed service members. No assessments, no foreclosures, no legal actions without independent state review. HOAs attempting major developments now face mandatory audits and criminal penalties for forging or misrepresenting property boundaries. Suddenly, HOAs everywhere were being audited. Homeowners who'd felt powerless for years finally had leverage. Restitution followed. Asset forfeiture from Bryce's companies funded reimbursements for Willowbrook families. My farm qualified for a conservation easement, giving long-term protection and funding for restoration. In one brutal swoop, the man who tried to erase my bloodline built the legal foundation that protected hundreds of families from the same fate. By fall, the orchard was healing. New saplings, descendants of the 1934 trees my grandfather grafted, stood in the rows where bulldozers once carved trenches. Planting them felt like stitching the family legacy back into the soil. One evening, I found an envelope on the porch. No name, just a note. "You didn't just save your farm. You saved our homes, too." That hit harder than any courtroom victory. Later, Judith, Calvin, and Margaret asked me to help build something bigger. A Veterans Farm initiative. A network to protect service members from HOA abuse, teach land rights, and fight predatory development. Within months, families from across the country reached out. Turns out Bryce wasn't unique, just the first to fall. Then September arrived, bringing the first Thornfield Heritage Festival. Kids climbed hay bales. Farmers grilled pork steaks. Veterans swapped stories. Willowbrook homeowners, once divided by fear, laughed together under strings of backyard lights. I stood on the rebuilt porch, watching apple trees sway in the evening breeze. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Cletus came up beside me. "Funny thing," he said. "Sometimes the best revenge is proving they never had the power to break you." I smiled. Or planting something better in the spot they tried to destroy. Because in the end, that's exactly what we did. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win.